What's good, homie G Sizzle Slice? As a white heterosexual male, the desire to own people is deeply ingrained in my DNA. Every day I wake up with uncontrollable urges to force my worldview upon others, to dictate what people can and can't say, and to control the actions of those who I consider lesser than myself. This outlook has seen a surprising resurgence in recent years, particularly with the middle class of Western society. However, in spite of this upward trend, Western games scarcely provide an outlet for my primal Caucasian urges. And so today we go back to the land of feudal Japan 2012 to play Dragon's Dogma, a bigger advocate for slavery than Apple and Nike combined. You are the Arisen, a hero brutally murdered by a dragon who stole your heart. Literally. Then resurrected by the same dragon who, like many of us, is on the fence about being suicidal. Your primary objective is to get your heart back by killing the dragon responsible for turning you into an immortal demigod. To do so, you'll need to consensually conscript the aid of pawns, a race of people-adjacent mercenaries in desperate need of saving from themselves through enslavement. You might think this line of thinking eerily similar to that of the British in the 1600s. However, pawns are canonically incapable of moving, thinking, or breathing without being ordered to do so. And is it really slavery if they don't have a choice? Shortly after beginning the game, you'll get to create your ideal property, who will accompany you throughout your journey. You can customize their appearance, class, loadout, behavior, and even their mannerisms. But in the words of the kind-hearted landlord, one property is not enough. This is a unique selling point of Dragon's Dogma, as to fill out your party of 4, you'll need to find a riftstone and enter the human trafficking pocket dimension. Here, you can recruit the slaves of other players. Be it men, women, children, or the mentally retarded, there are many candidates to choose from. And just like real life, you can filter resumes based on skills, class, or even gender, to carefully curate your ideal party. Other players' pawns won't gain levels while in your world, and so eventually they'll need to be replaced with new ones. This can at times be a heart-wrenching experience, and I'll never truly fill the void left by Uncle Touchy. But thankfully, any pawns you favorite have a chance to visit you each time you visit a riftstone. You may even see them wandering the roads on your travels. There are 9 classes total, and pawns can be 6, each bringing their own unique benefits to your party's composition. For example, I made my pawn a mage, as it's the only class with healing, but then I learned that sorcerers can do this. Without a mage in your party, the only way to heal is with consumables, and if you still want someone else to heal you, they'll need an ample supply of multi-target healing potions. This entails ritualistically stealing a public pool 1 bottle at a time.
Welcome to the rice fields, motherfucker!
The harvesting of piss-laced health potions is a painfully slow process, and sadly there's no amount of hardstyle that can lessen the monotony. The majority of your time in Dragon's Dogma will be spent completing quests. Most quests are not mandatory, and their primary purpose is to send your party to places. My personal favorite quest involved evicting a family of 3, and while growing the homeless population is thankless work, seeing them huddled shivering under a tree every night for the remainder of the game is truly all the thanks I need. This game has very little in the way of innate fast travel. There's only 3 locations you can travel to by default, and any additional fast travel points are placed manually by the player. These creatively named port crystals can be placed anywhere in the open world. This grants the unique ability for players to create fast travel points at the locations they personally deem most useful. However, your first playthrough, particularly in the early game, will have little to no access to port crystals, meaning that reaching your destination will involve a moderate amount of cardio, a process drawn out by the limited stamina of the player character, which is further limited by the weight of your sack. While playing American Athlete Simulator isn't always an enjoyable experience, manual traversal is where the majority of your exploration and random encounters will take place. Speaking of encounters, let's talk about the combat. It's incredible. This is a Cyclops. It has 1 eye, a large club, and sometimes a helmet. It is also very big. The eye is its weak spot, but to reach it as a melee class, you'll need to either knock the Cyclops down or climb it. Unlike in most games, climbing monsters is not a quick-time event. Instead, you attach yourself to monsters, then freely crawl around their body like a sort of crack-addled chimp. This evokes a different reaction from monsters depending on where you grope them and when. For example, clinging to the upper back of a Cyclops will often result in attempted void boring, but the upper back is also a blind spot to a Cyclops if they're wearing a helmet. And so, as the Cyclops is fishing around to find its snack, it will also remove its helmet for a better view. Climbing on a Cyclops' leg can cause it to lose balance, at which point striking its supportive leg will send it crashing to the ground. A grounded Cyclops has an entirely different set of attacks primarily centered around protecting its eye, meaning that while its weak point is now technically within reach, you may find a vasectomy to be the safer choice. Attacking the eye will cause the Cyclops to reel in pain, nursing its eye as it swings blindly. While attacking the eye, you'll probably also hit a tusk. Hit it hard enough and it'll break off as a lootable material for upgrading your gear. Bizarrely, this angers the Cyclops, who will gain increased damage and attack in a faster, more wild fashion. A particularly bright player may choose to separate the Cyclops from their club before pissing them off. This can be achieved in one of two ways: either attack the club arm until they drop it, or stun them with lightning magic. This is particularly effective against an armored Cyclops, as lightning attacks combined with a metal helmet will always stun a Cyclops and can be repeated indefinitely. When an angered Cyclops exhausts themselves, they become more prone to being knocked down. And a fun fact about the Cyclops is that at one point in a time long past, much like the player, they were adventurers. Until one day they took an arrow in the knee. The monsters in this game are far more fleshed out than even most modern games, which is doubly impressive when you realize that this game came out less than a year after Skyrim, further cementing the fact that Bethesda hasn't gone downhill. They were never on the hill to begin with. You may have noticed by now that this game is ugly, but what it lacks in graphical fidelity, it makes up for in atmosphere and grandiose. This is the first game that's managed to recapture that initial feeling of the first time I played Dark Souls. The combination of slightly jank combat, stats I don't fully understand, and an immersive and incredibly bleak world shown through the lens of a story which is at worst confusing and at best Berserk fanfiction. This is not a coincidence, as much like Dark Souls, which came out the same year, Dragon's Dogma takes great inspiration from Berserk. I'd like to show you every reference, but I never actually finished Berserk. Getting through the award-winning CGI of the second series was one thing, but it turns out that learning to enjoy black and white, poorly translated backwards comic books is really difficult without a pre-existing fatherless childhood. This may look like a wholesome adventure game on the surface, but stop to smell the roses and you'll soon notice just how fucked things actually are. From people being torn limb from limb just outside of frame, to false imprisonment, to subsequent torture, to even ogres. Ogres like women. The mere sight of a woman is enough to get them excited. While attacking, ogres will heavily prioritize any female characters, and during combat they may even attempt to outright steal them, plucking them from the battlefield, then fleeing someplace quiet to enjoy a romantic dinner for one. The first time I encountered an ogre, it spent the entire fight trying to kidnap and defile my party's warrior. Then, upon dying, it dropped 2 slabs of penis meat which were used in the brewing of stamina potions. And it was at this moment I realized I was playing a masterpiece. Also, before you assume this is a based women-hating game punishing you for the heinous crime of playing a female, this is an elder ogre. It's about 10 times stronger than a regular ogre and does all the same things a regular ogre does, but to male characters. Upon kidnapping me, an elder ogre once managed to walk all the way to Africa, tenderly caress my face with its teeth, and then flying dropkick me to death. Hilariously, if an ogre mistakenly attempts to eat a character of the unpalatable gender, it will physically recoil before keeling over in disgust. And it's details like these which go a long way in giving monsters a sense of personality. Upon getting your heart back, you'll unlock the post-game. What this means for the open world is that basic enemies are now more powerful. For example, wolves have learned the art of firebending, while goblins have learned the art of necessary force. The post-game also grants access to single-player endgame content in the form of the Everfall, aptly named as traversal of the Everfall is identical to that of a elevator. There are 15 levels, each with its own dungeon. Within these dungeons, you'll find some endgame gear, as well as an abundance of wake stones, which you can use to unlock one of the game's endings. One particular dungeon is even home to a single-player raid boss, the Dragon. But before we talk about the Dragon, let's talk about math. Unlike many games where defense would reduce damage by a percentage and attack would increase your damage based on several multiplicative percentages, in Dragon's Dogma both are pretty much flat numbers. I'm going to simplify for the sake of, well, simplicity, but let's say you have 100 physical attack, and that means that your physical attacks deal 100 damage. An enemy has 50 physical defense, and that means that they take 50 less damage. And so, if you double the amount of physical attack you have, you're not doubling the damage you do, you're tripling it. Likewise, if instead the enemy has twice as much defense, they're not halving the damage received, they're removing it entirely. Again, this isn't completely accurate, as enemies who deal less damage than I have defense will still occasionally deal 1 damage. But what this essentially means is that big, slow, hard-hitting attacks condensed into a single strike that far exceeds an enemy's defense are exponentially more powerful than a series of smaller strikes which barely exceed their defense. The primary way you gain more physical or magic attack is by leveling up, but the amount you gain is tied to whichever class you were playing when you leveled. This means if you level to 100 as a warrior, you'll have 100 levels of warrior stats, and if you change classes, you'll still have 100 levels of warrior stats. With this in mind, let me introduce you to the class that I chose, the Mystic Knight. I picked this class because it's kind of like a paladin and it's advertised as a sort of tank-mage hybrid, and so the vast majority of my leveling was as this class. The Mystic Knight's primary damage source is from magic, but leveling as a Mystic Knight gives you a fraction of the magic you'd gain if you were instead a sorcerer. This means that whereas both my magical and physical attacks were useful against enemies with low defense as I had some magic attack, bosses who tend to have high defense wouldn't take any fucking damage. With that said, this is the Dragon, a corrupted interdimensional online version of the dragon at the end of the campaign with 30 million health, which is depleted anytime a player fights it in their world. You get 8 minutes to fight it and can do so repeatedly, gaining increased rewards the more you contribute in either damage or attempts. Seeing as my character can't do the 1.2 million damage required to get the maximum rewards, I would instead have to complete 10 separate 8-minute attempts, and doing this on 3 separate occasions was an experience which left me slightly mind-broken. Speaking of mind-broken, it was also within the Everfall that I would frequently discover pawns whose masters had died. These pawns, unable to leave, age, or starve to death, are doomed, wandering the same hallway in the same world in different time periods, forever. This pawn informs me that his master's dying words were stay, and so now he remains here forever to sell his master's stuff, which hilariously implies that if all these dead masters' last words were instead leave, their pawns might never have been in this predicament. Regardless, my mercy killing was now completely justified. The second form of endgame content, the Bitter Black Isles, was introduced with the Dark Arisen expansion, and is actually accessible from the start of the game. The Bitter Black Isles are essentially a very long dungeon with some branching paths, all filled with increasingly dangerous enemies and increasingly powerful loot. It was here I learned the joys of combat with pawns who use Maelstrom.
What the oh, what a perfect time to use Maelstrom. Oh, thank you, Mayred. Thank you so much.
As well as combat with enemies who use Maelstrom. Oh.
Everyone, be healed. It's a troubling foe. I cannot take much more.
Okay. Upon reaching the end of the dungeon, you'll find the game's final boss. Kill the boss and the Bitter Black Isles will reset and be filled with even stronger enemies for you to clear through again. Despite the layout of the dungeon not changing, the new enemies are more than enough to make a second clear fun. This time, upon reaching the end of the dungeon, you'll fight the true final boss, and this is perhaps the most egregious example of why Mystic Knights shouldn't level as Mystic Knights, as when I fought the final boss, my magic stat was so low that my primary source of damage, Magic Cannon, couldn't even damage the boss, or more accurately, it would occasionally deal 1 damage. This fight, from start to finish, took 70 minutes, 40 of which entailed my pawns slowly whittling down the boss's health as I, just happy to be there, would repeatedly re-enchant their weapons. Then, when the boss had just over 1 health bar remaining, the floor, suddenly overcome with the unholy spirit of Nikocado Avocado, consumed my entire party, leaving me alone to finish off the boss's single remaining health bar for 30 minutes. With the final boss defeated, I could happily say I've beaten the game. There is a new game plus, but enemies don't get any stronger, leading me to believe it exists for the disgusting casual scum who didn't immediately restart the game to play on hard mode, which I did. So in summary, Dragon's Dogma is another common Japan W, right next to hentai and the patriarchy. Its deeply atmospheric world is both dark and intriguing, the combat is satisfying and methodical, and if you want it to be, even challenging. The pawn system is both unique and charming, and the enemy design is beyond incredible. Now, with Capcom Shaft sufficiently gargled, I'd recommend Dragon's Dogma to any fan of dark fantasy or RPGs. If you like what you see, it's cheap and frequently goes on sale for much cheaper. Also, with the sequel just around the corner, there's never been a better time to get into the franchise. Thank you for watching and have a pleasant immediate existence.